Welcome to the great town of Grimsby, a historic North Lincolnshire settlement founded by the Vikings, and which rose to prominence in the 20th century as the world's largest fishing port. Despite suggestions drawn from the town's name, Grimsby is nowhere near as grim as you might hear, and the modern town looks spectacular under the sun at the height of summer. On this walk around the heart of Grimsby, we'll explore the town's centuries of captivating heritage, beginning here, on the wide-open and recently redeveloped St James's Square, named for the impressive church that stands before us. The square is dominated by what was once known as St James's Church, the parish church of Grimsby, but which in 2010 was upgraded in status to be known as Grimsby Minster. Grimsby Minster is the second oldest building in town today, having been built almost around 1,000 years ago during England's Norman period. Grimsby Minster is a symbol of this town's long history, but Grimsby as we know it today was actually born even before the church was built, having been founded by the Vikings around the 9th century as a small fishing village located to the south of the mighty Humber estuary. Looking at a map, we can see Grimsby in that very location, and on the eastern coast of what is today North Lincolnshire. Positioned by the North Sea, historically one of the world's most plentiful regions for fishing, Grimsby developed over time to become a leading light in the industry. And here on St James's Square, there stands a striking memorial to Grimsby's fishermen, on whose backs the modern town was built. Grimsby's fishermen lived and worked perilously for a long time, and the memorial on the square pays tribute to those who lost their lives while fishing among the waves of the North Sea. Ever since the Vikings founded this place in the 9th century, fishing was right at the heart of life in Grimsby, but the town has changed immeasurably in the 1100 years since its birth. Not only have recent regeneration projects like the building of the wonderful St James's Square brought new life to parts of central Grimsby, but areas all over the town have seen redevelopment in the face of what have undoubtedly been a trying past few decades for Grimsby. As we make our way away from St James's Square deeper into the heart of town, the historic fishing industry which supported the town for so long has unfortunately faced decline in recent decades, hitting the local economy and causing parts of the town centre to become neglected. But in recent years, Grimsby has begun making moves to reinvent its town centre, with heritage right at its heart. From the fishing memorial on St James's Square to the historic docks area of the town, which we'll reach towards the end of our walk, there's a lot of captivating history to discover on a walk around Grimsby, but some of it is rather more hidden from view. For example, here we've reached Grimsby's old marketplace, the historic home of trade and commerce that was once a very busy part of the town. Looking at this postcard of 1860, the marketplace was once much wider than the small square that exists today, although the building of modern retail developments in the centre of Grimsby has gradually cut away at the old marketplace. The home of local markets, the marketplace was once neighboured by what was named Butchery Lane, home to a number of local butchers, as well as Bullring Lane, which led to the town's famous bull ring. Now Grimsby's old bull ring was once one of the most popular places in town, and it takes its name from the activity that took place there, bull baiting. Bull baiting, once a fairly standard piece of local entertainment in England centuries ago, was where bulls, destined for the slaughterhouse, were chained to the ground in the middle of a ring, and then attacked by vicious bulldogs, which is where bulldogs actually get their name from. For a long time, bull baiting was a hugely popular form of entertainment, but as an extremely barbaric practice, it was put to an end in 1779. But while they couldn't head to the bull ring for a bit of brutal blood sport, the people of 18th century Grimsby were on the verge of what was set to become an extremely prosperous period for the town. The Industrial Revolution, which raged across Britain in the 18th and 19th centuries, brought a fantastic opportunity for the fishing town of Grimsby. With the nation's population rapidly booming, and more people going to work in factories, Grimsby began supplying the food that fed industrial Britain. By the year 1900, 10% of all fish eaten in Britain came from Grimsby, a fact which brought immense economic prosperity to the town. The Savoy picture house here, built in 1920, is one fruit of Grimsby's economic prowess at that time, standing as one of the town's most beautiful buildings on the famous Victoria Street, Grimsby's main shopping street, and which was also laid out during the town's most glorious era. Victoria Street too has been recently redeveloped, but once upon a time, trams ran along it amid the hustle and bustle of the street, and in between rows of magnificent Victorian and Edwardian era buildings. But this wasn't even the peak of Grimsby's rise in fortunes. By 1931, Grimsby's population reached a height of 92,000 people, more than even today, and the town began to cement itself as what would later become the largest and most active fishing port in the entire world. But how on earth did this Lincolnshire town rise to become such a world-beating port? And why is it no longer the industry leader that it once was? Well, to understand the origins of Grimsby's success, we need to go all the way back to the town's birth. Even before the Vikings rocked up in the 9th century, there was a smattering of small Anglo-Saxon settlements in the area. Victoria Street here, for example, was an important Saxon-era road, following the course of the local River Freshney, which still flows through Grimsby, to the coast. The Freshney continued to play an important role in the development of Grimsby through the following centuries, feeding the town's vitally important docks, located just across Riverhead Square here. The wide-open Riverhead Square is yet another impressively developed part of central Grimsby, even renamed as the Plaza to give it a bit of extra pizzazz. We'll cross the Plaza over towards the town's docks in a short while, but we're now going to take a walk into Grimsby's Civic Quarter, one of the more modern parts of town, but which still houses some intriguing historical treasures. That includes the historic Great Grimsby Seal, also known as the Havelok Seal, which depicts the Viking founders of Grimsby. The seal was created in the 13th century after Grimsby was granted a charter by King John, allowing the town to govern itself with relative independence and to set its own taxes. What's more, Grimsby's iconic town seal is thought to be the only town emblem in Britain which portrays an image of the town's original founders. Those founders were 3 Vikings, the famous Havelok the Dane, Princess Goldborough, and a fisherman named Grim. We'll talk more about the impact of that Viking trio on Grimsby in a few minutes. But here, we're looking up at Grimsby's Central Library, on which we can see the town's rather ominous 5 Guardians of Knowledge. The 11-foot-tall figures were placed on the library in 1968, and are said to stand there to protect the building and the pursuit of knowledge, making for an intriguing highlight of Grimsby's varied architecture. Just across the road from the mid-20th century library building stands another building built during the Victorian period, as Grimsby continued to boom. This is the former Corporation Grammar School, built and opened in 1867. But the Corporation Grammar School itself actually has an even longer history than this old building, dating back all the way to the reign of the young King Edward VI, under whom it was founded in the year 1547. The school is no longer in operation, however, and this building went on to be used as the town registrar's office, located next to Grimsby's rather impressive town hall. The town hall is another symbol of Grimsby's 19th century grandeur, its size demonstrating just how much this town was developing at the time. Built in 1863, this Victorian-era town hall is actually the 4th to have existed in Grimsby. Now, the first 3 Grimsby town halls were actually built over near the Minster, constructed in succession since the 13th century. In the medieval era, the area by the church where we started our walk was indeed one of the most important points in town, but it soon became inadequate for thriving industrial-era Grimsby. That's why this larger town hall had to be built in a more open part of town, with these streets formerly occupied by fields, but which were turned into the home of local government and administration as Grimsby continued to thrive on the back of its fishing industry. In later years, the town hall was expanded to include a courthouse, a council chamber, and even police stations with jail cells inside. Today, you can even visit the old jail cells, located underground beneath the town hall, and which is today the home of Grimsby's Time Trap Museum, which details the town's history. The upper floors of the town hall, meanwhile, are now home to North East Lincolnshire Council, and before that, the old Great Grimsby District Council. Much like the Great Grimsby Seal that we saw on the side of the library, the old District Council bore the name Great Grimsby. But why? Well, although local Grimbarians do indeed have great hometown pride, the Great in Great Grimsby isn't a declaration of how amazing the place is, but rather more geographical in origin. More specifically, the name Great Grimsby is used to differentiate this town from the tiny hamlet of Little Grimsby, home to just a handful of people, and which is located about 14 miles to the south of here. But Great Grimsby and Little Grimsby do beg the question, where exactly does the name Grimsby come from? Well, that takes us back to the Viking founders of Grimsby, depicted on the town seal that we saw a few minutes ago. One of the figures on the seal was Grim, a Dane who lent his name to the settlement that was established here. The Old Norse suffix "by" means village, and so Grimsby literally means Grim's village. But who exactly was Grim? Most people like to think that Grim was simply a humble Viking fisherman who settled here on England's eastern coast. But it's also been suggested that Grim was one of the great gods of Norse mythology. In ancient Norse mythology, the god Odin, father of Thor, would often travel among mortals, but he would do so remaining in disguise. And when in disguise, Odin would use the name Grim, a name said to relate to a mask. That's why some think that Grimsby's Grim could have been the Norse god Odin himself. But now, we've reached the first sign of Grimsby's major network of docks, where we see the Barge Pub, moored on this small quay. The barge was once a grain barge, but it's been floating on the quay here since 1982, when it was lifted from the main docks into what was then known as Riverhead Square. Now used as a pub, the old barge is a bit of a squeeze if you're going for a drink, but an iconic landmark that survived through the redevelopment of this area of Grimsby. As we mentioned, Riverhead Square has now been officially renamed as the Plaza, and across this wide open square we can see the Freshney Place shopping centre, which dominates a large part of central Grimsby. Built in the 1960s, this huge shopping centre is one of the largest in Lincolnshire, and draws in shoppers from all across the north and east of the county. But while Freshney Place is thoroughly popular with shoppers, it was controversial at the time of its construction, as much of Grimsby's old town had to make way for it, including much of the old bull ring that we spoke about earlier. As such, there's very little left of old Grimsby in the 21st century, but what does remain is now being well preserved. But while the old town is now long gone, the most important part of Grimsby through history still remains on clear display for all to see: the docks. And as we walk away from the plaza in the very heart of Grimsby, that's where we're going to now. Now, most of the docks that exist in Grimsby today were built in the 19th century, as the scale of the town's maritime industry reached unprecedented heights. But Grimsby has been a place of important maritime trade for much longer, right back to the days of its Viking founders. In the Viking era, Grimsby developed as a fishing village of moderate size, and was engaged in trade with Scandinavia. But it was a couple of centuries afterwards, in the Norman era, that the town rose to become a port of major importance. Here we find ourselves at the end of the Alexandra Dock, which lies at the mouth of the River Freshney, just under this bridge. Historically, the River Freshney flowed out into the Humber further to the west of here, but it was rerouted to bring a fresh water supply to Grimsby's docks. Originally, Grimsby's docks were built around a natural coastal haven, the perfect place for a major dock, but from the 15th century, they began to suffer from silting, which prevented ships from docking. As such, the rerouting of the Freshney kept Grimsby's important docks in action, as the town had by then staked a strong reputation as one of medieval England's great trading ports. In the 11th century, after the Normans had removed the Vikings from this part of England, they began to establish major coastal ports in order to do business with continental Europe. Grimsby, located here on England's east coast and home to a large natural haven, was the ideal place to establish one of these ports. In the medieval era, Grimsby's port was always teeming with trade, but the silting issues that appeared in the docks in the 15th century soon spelled disaster for the town. With ships no longer able to dock at Grimsby, the town began to spiral into a dramatic decline, causing almost all trade that supported the locale to vanish in a very short period of time. This persistent decline lasted for the best part of 4 centuries, and by the turn of the 19th century, Grimsby had shrunk to its size from at least 500 years before, home to only 1,524 people. But as we know, Grimsby would soon see a reversal in its seemingly endless downturn. The 19th century was an era of triumph for this great port town, thanks in no small part to the development of its docks. Beside us is the Alexandra Dock, built from 1880, and which was developed to serve as an extension of the old dock, which opened nearly a century beforehand in the 1790s. Grimsby's grand docks were the brainchild of the Grimsby Haven Company, who built upon the town's historic trading profile and developed large, modern docks that wouldn't be plagued by the silting issues that had proved so devastating centuries beforehand. This allowed ever larger ships to dock in Grimsby, the first step in its revival as a thriving centre of trade. In the 1840s, the arrival of the railways in Grimsby brought with it even more trade, prompting further expansion of the docks as the town's port took on commerce emanating from right across Britain and Europe. The symbol of all this immense development became Grimsby's huge dock tower, shown in this image. The dock tower, still standing today by the sea, was built in 1852, and at 200 feet or 61 metres tall, it was one of the tallest buildings in England for its time. The building here, the Grimsby Fishing Heritage Centre, tells the story of the town's glorious heyday as a fishing port, which at its height in the 1950s was home to a fishing fleet of over 1,000 ships, one of which is moored just beside the museum here on the Alexandra Dock. This is the famous Ross Tiger, an icon of Grimsby's historic fishing industry. A large trawler boat, the Ross Tiger was constructed from 1957, and it's the last remaining vessel from what was once the largest fishing fleet on the planet. A particularly large trawler weighing 355 tons, the ship was one of 12 built at the peak of Grimsby's fishing industry in the 1950s, designed to head out deep into the North Sea to catch cod and haddock, with its large size allowing the boat to carry thousands of fish at once back to the shore for sale in Britain. But as well as having greater capacity, the large size of the Ross Tiger allowed it to push further away from the coast than any other boat in Grimsby's fishing fleet, able to take on the dangerous waves of the North Sea. The men who ventured out to sea on boats like the Ross Tiger were said to have the most dangerous job in Britain, and as we saw with the Fisherman's Memorial on St James's Square at the start of our walk, many lost their lives while out at sea. But while the fishing industry was crucial to Grimsby for so long, the industry began to face decline in the second half of the 20th century. Initially, fishing in Grimsby was hit by the result of the Cod Wars, 3 non-violent conflicts fought between Britain and Iceland in the 1950s and 70s over where each country's fishermen were allowed to work, as the Icelandics saw big new ships like the Ross Tiger as a threat that might encroach on its territorial waters. The Cod Wars ultimately ended with the Icelandics, despite being vastly outnumbered, actually expanding the scope of their territorial waters, the first nail in the coffin of Grimsby's world-beating industry. In 1983, these troubles were further compounded after the introduction of the Common Fisheries Policy by the European Union. Already limited as to where they could fish by the loss of the Cod Wars, the Common Fisheries Policy allowed fishermen from other EU nations to come and fish in the North Sea, which heavily reduced Grimsby's importance as a place that exported fish. As a result of both developments and a range of other factors, fishing in Grimsby has seen a sharp fall since the 1970s, which resulted in a rise in deprivation across the town. But dock infrastructure like the Corporation Bridge here, which lifts up to allow ships to pass through, is proving useful for the town's development into the future. While Alexandra Dock here is rarely used by ships today, the docks in Grimsby are still busy with trading activity. For example, over 400,000 cars are imported into the UK via Grimsby every year, making this port a leader in that field. Meanwhile, many of the former dock warehouses and factories have been converted for use to store imported food products, while some have gone even further. Before us here is the immense Victoria Mills, built between 1889 and 1906 as a former flour storage facility, but which have recently been converted into modern apartments. The old Victoria Mills are a grand reminder of Grimsby's once world-beating power as a port town, which remarkably grew up from a small Viking village to become the biggest fishing port on earth. And while its heyday has faded away, the town is really starting to rekindle some of that lost glory, with many of the fascinating developments we've seen on our walk. And that brings us to the end of our tour of Grimsby, a town with so much more to it than first meets the eye. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you're now looking forward to exploring Grimsby for yourself too.